This conference will now be recorded.
And we will also make this available, the presentation slides after the presentation has ended for those of you who want to receive those copies. But with that, I will start the clock, turn it over to Matthew, and let him take it away.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it. And thanks to everybody for joining this morning. Hope your day is going well. I'm in Northeast Indiana, so relatively close to the state of Michigan. And it's a beautiful day today. It's the kind of day that you look up in the morning, you take a deep breath when you're out there and you say, man, what a great day to talk about fiber. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of jump right in. By way of introduction, my name is Matthew Hagemann. I'm with Charles Industries. Charles Industries has 50 plus years in the telecommunications market, primarily focused these days on fiber infrastructure, wireless, wireline, broadband, and as of late, utility and industrial markets. As of April of last year, we became part of the Amphenol company of families, but what hasn't gone away is our brand, our commitment to our customers, and the way in which we choose to manage our business. So I'm grateful that you all chose to spend a few minutes with me this morning and look forward to our time together. Anytime you get an opportunity to talk with folks, you always want to make certain that they have a good idea of what I'm trying to accomplish here. And with everything that's available on fiber today, we're not going to re-educate people. What we are going to do is make you, hopefully, aware of some things that come into play as you design, deploy, and service your fiber networks. And if you take away something from that today, then it's been a good day for me as far as that goes. The topics we'll hit on are primarily the different types of fiber networks in terms of deployments, passive, active, the different types of splits and taps, and then as Scott had indicated, we'll leave a little bit of time at the back end for Q&A. And just because we're done at some point in time doesn't mean that questions can't come later. And Scott, thank you for making the comment about the presentation. I will be forwarding a copy of the presentation after I'm done here. But I have to make certain that the links I use in here work. They worked earlier, but you never know what's going to happen in real time. So when you get a copy of the deck, I want to make certain that it actually does what I say it's going to do. So with all of that introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about fiber architecture today. And the one statement that I repeatedly come back to is there is no one right way to build a fiber to the home or fiber to the premise or fiber to the X network. Lots of decisions come into play, and those decisions are predicated on a number of things that exist and may be unique for you. But the decisions that you make kind of fall into some different buckets. Are you going to splice or are you going to do connectorized? Is it going to be aerial? Is it going to be at grade? Is it going to be underground? And to further dig into that a little bit more, are you going to use pedestals? Are you going to use handholds? And how quickly do you need to deploy? I've always liked that last bullet there. There is religion involved. And basically what that means is I'll go back to the top statement. There's not a right way. And if it works for you and if it works for your subscribers and your constituents, then it works. I also want to let you guys know that that pocket knife over on the right is a tool that I carry with me. And that's one of my favorite pictures. And it's actually not a tool. But if there was one like that, I would carry it with me. So without any further ado, there's really two basic types of FTTH architectures that we talk about. There's a passive architecture and there's an active architecture. Now, if I were to take those Ethernet switches in the lower right-hand corner and replace them with the word pond splitter, you would find that from a layout standpoint, the networks look very, very similar. You get fiber into either a splitter or a switch, and you get multiple fibers out from that same splitter or switch. But where it comes down to the differences are in the cost to deploy, the types of architectures, and the types of services that you're able to utilize as a result of it. Obviously, if there's two solutions, one is lower cost, one is higher cost. The higher cost one is the one that involves the active components, because not only do you have the active components, which are a little bit pricier, hardened switches are not inexpensive. They're a little more expensive than a splitter, but further, all the cabinets or enclosures or places where you're going to put those are going to require power. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't make one right or one wrong. It just makes them two different ways to skin the cat. So without going too much into the detail, your basic PON network looks something like this. You're taking your triple play services out of the CO, you're putting them out to a house, or you're putting them out to a consolidation point, at which point you're splitting the signal, and then you're sending that signal onward to all of your subscribers. There's some different pieces of equipment that are basically part of any PON network that you have here. You've got your OLTs, you've got your splitters, and then you've got your ONT, which is sitting back at the house location. The way and the methodology in which these networks split, there's some differences within that. And obviously you have to take into account your optical budget as what your constituents need to be receiving when it gets to their home. But when it comes down to it, the fundamentals of this look this way. So to kind of hit some high point bullet points on passive optical networking, upsides, I'm saying typical split. Everybody on this call knows that you can go as little as 1x2 or as high as up to 1x128. It all depends on how your network is laid out, the architecture, the density of your subscriber base. It goes upstream and downstream using WDM. It's lower cost to deploy relative to an active network. And there's no electronics to buy, maintain, fix, or replace. So your point of failure within an active piece of equipment does not exist. Now, you can have points of failure within your splitters, but more often than not, once it's plugged in, once it's tested, once it's commissioned and lit up, those networks work. The downsides to a PON network is because you don't have those active components regenerating the signals, you have some distance limitations. Your speeds might be a little bit slower because you've got latency baked in during peak periods. I know I've been working at home since March. My neighborhood, it's a fiber to the home neighborhood, and at certain times during the day, my performance seems to suffer a little bit, specifically when the college kids were home over the summer and there was streaming going on my network. We have a pretty good network here, but even that gets hit with it. And then I'm contending with the neighbors for that same bandwidth. Things would get a little bit slower. That's why I'm grateful we're doing this thing in the morning. And then last but not least, because you're splitting fibers, it can become a little more difficult to troubleshoot and isolate problems. You don't have dedicated links, point-to-point links. You've got split links. So my fiber going out, it could be part of a bigger issue on the left side of the switch if we're looking at a line diagram, or the left side of the splitter. It could be on the right side, and it could be mine and mine alone. Or if there's multiple splits, it could be anywhere within that network. TDRs help us to, and OTDRs help us to troubleshoot those, but sometimes it takes a little bit longer to get there. So that was the passive side. On the active side, the network looks pretty much the same. It's very, very similar. We're delivering the same types of services. The only difference is that splitter is now a powered device. In most cases, it's an Ethernet switch because you've got a standards-based protocol by which you're moving all this voice, video, and data around on the network. As I'd mentioned earlier on in the presentation, the primary difference here is a cost difference between hardened gear and power within the remote access cabinets. And we're going to do the same thing here as we did with the PON. We're going to hit a little bit on the upsides and the downsides of the active network. Active networks, you get your own fiber to the switch, and it frees up a little bit more bandwidth, if you will. Ethernet is a contention network. It follows the 802.xx standards as far as contention is concerned, but you've got a little bit more flexibility in terms of a dedicated fiber link. Using Ethernet standards means that you're going to be able to get interoperability among vendors, i.e. it's vendor agnostic. Just as the passive gear can be agnostic, now you can work with multiple suppliers. You don't have to have the same switches throughout your network. You can source as needed to provide the switches that best suit your budget and your operating standards, so long as they're all compliant with the Ethernet standards. And because you're regenerating the signal at a switch, your distances can go significantly farther. Downsides, cost, reliability. Hardened switches are pretty doggone reliable today. And again, this is a religion decision that you're going to make on your own as far as what you want to put into your network. But your CapEx on the front end, as well as your cost to maintain, is generally a little bit higher. So we've hit on the actives, we've hit on the passives. Within the passive optical networking, and what we've seen in the marketplace, at least from a Charles perspective, is there tends to be more PON networks being deployed. I think that's a cost-based decision. I don't think that's a performance-based decision. I think the reliability of both is pretty robust at this point in time. There's nothing that's bleeding edge that folks are putting out there that they're putting hundreds and thousands of subscribers on. But within the PON network itself, there are myriad types of splits that are being used. And again, it comes down to cost, deployment, optical budgets. So what does that look like? From a network architecture standpoint, you have centralized, distributed split, and a distributed tap architecture. The centralized split looks very much like the slides that I showed earlier. It's for a denser subscriber base. I live in your, I don't want to call it a cookie cutter subdivision, but it's a neighborhood with lots of homes, and we've got cabinets throughout the neighborhood, and the cabinets are the splitter cabinets, and the fiber gets distributed out of those. These are fairly easy to grow, fairly easy to maintain. What you do is you get your splitter cabinets put into place, and then you populate them with splitters as you go. Pretty straightforward, pretty clean. A distributed split also covers a dense subscriber base, but it might be that there's multiple neighborhoods that are being serviced, or you have spread out homes or larger estate homes, or there's some MDU, MTU mixed into this. But what this means is that your architecture is built to service the customers that are in a non-uniform layout. Some folks might be right up near that first splitter while others are farther away. And this is when you get into splitters that are oftentimes a smaller form factor. And what I mean by that is their split ratios. You could have a 1x4 or a 1x8 or a 1x16. It's not a great big cabinet populated with 1x32 splitters. And the form factor that those splitters are held in is often different. You don't need a 288 or a 576 cabinet for these. You just might need 96 ports, or you might need 144 ports max capacity, or something even smaller. You'll often see these in smaller cabinets on pole mount enclosures, or even in pedestals for that matter. And then the last type of architecture in terms of splitting off fibers for your subscribers is what we call a distributed tap. And what you're doing here, others have called this fiber indexing. There's other names for it in the marketplace, is you're expressing a certain number of fibers through, and you're tapping off of that via a splitter tap or a tap tray or something like that. And where you see this deployed is oftentimes where there's a smaller subscriber base or it's more distant. Rural areas tend to get this with fiber running down the side of the road, and then you're dropping a tap off to feed one or two homes. The one comment there on the second bullet point with the network being a little bit less robust, it doesn't have to do with the integrity of the connectors or the connections or the ONTs or anything like that. What it has to do is if that fiber gets cut somewhere at this point, everything downstream from there is out. And therein lies the comment on the less robustness of that network architecture. So this is the Charles commercial part of the things. In regardless of what your split architecture is going to be in a centralized split, we do have solutions, whether it be pedestal-based, cabinet-based. We have splitters. What's not referenced here is we've also got aerial components and pieces and parts that will help to resolve some of your deployment and your design issues. The same thing here where you get to a smaller form factor of pedestals and maybe a splitter tray instead within your distributed split architectures. And the point being is that regardless of what type of architecture, regardless of what your religion is, as long as we're all believing that fiber is a religion that we need to be working on, Charles more than likely has something that can help you along those lines. The PON splitter selection here is, again, it drives pedestal selection. This would be a tap trunk architecture. Again, we're just looking at the same types of architecture in a slightly different manner and letting you know that there's solutions that we have as well as others. There's a lot of good manufacturers out there in this space and a lot of good design firms and a lot of good contractors. We're doing a service by bringing fiber to the constituents and the subscribers out there. These are some examples of some of our fiber tap modules or our fiber tap trays. Obviously, you can decide what those values are as far as your attenuation and what you need to get out of those. There are 2, 4, and 8 port options. It'll fit on a splice tray. It'll fit in a module depending on where you put it. So as we come out of the clubhouse turn here and start talking about what's on your mind. There are things that you need to consider when it comes down to deployment of your FTTX networks. Obviously, geography is going to drive the choice. Are you flat? Are you rural? Are you metropolitan? Are you mountainous? Are you hilly? What's your weather? How much variability do you have season to season? What are the codes of the municipalities? What can you and can't you do? We work with a number of carriers on a daily basis that serve multiple markets, and one market has to be below grade, and another market has to be aerial, and a third market likes pedestals. Population density, of course, is going to determine how your architecture and your network lays out. Budget, favorite architecture. What are you used to working with? What parts do you have? It doesn't make sense to come up with something new if you've got something that works. I always, if you find something that works, you keep repeating it. It's we have 3 kids, and you find a meal that they all like, you're going to cook it every other week because you know that everybody's going to be happy. Same thing with your favorite architecture. You're going to keep bringing that architecture back if it works because it's familiar for your customers, for your deployment partners, for your installation technicians, and your service guys. And that makes your level of service go up. I hit on the aerial versus at grade versus below grade. And again, whether it be a closure, a cabinet, a pedestal, below grade enclosure, all of these different items will work in your network. So having said all that, this is the exciting part of the presentation. We do have online a guide, and it loaded for me previously. There it is. It's the outside plant FTTP selection guide. You will have a link to this in the presentation. I'm not going to go through a brochure online because you can do this at your own leisure. But what I wanted to show you out of this was that there's a lot of those layouts that we talked about in the presentation today that are articulated here, that talk about the pros and the cons. It's not stuff that I need to repeat here. Here's a little more complex network. But what we're doing with this is we're showing you the different types of solutions that Charles brings to the market, and all of these different acronyms that you've got scattered throughout here, FODC Dome or FSDC Aerial, whatever the case, are further back within this brochure. So it can help you along the line in terms of making decisions that are best for your network and best for your constituents. So with that, I think I'm at about 17 minutes, so I probably talked faster than I had actually rehearsed, but I'm at the point where I'm more than happy to take on any questions. Before I do, if I would forget, the 2 most important words that I can say today are thank you. Thank you for your time, your attention, and the opportunity to be on here with you today. And if there are any questions at present, I will do my very best to answer them. And if I can't, make certain that we get your contact info and can do a follow-up.
This is Mike Holmes. I've got just a general cost question. Can you give us a range of the order of magnitude difference between the 2 options that you've outlined? And for the higher cost option, do you have a sense of is that cost difference ever recovered over time? And if so, over what period of time?
Mike, thank you for the question. Would you be referring to the passive versus the active?
Yes, that's the distinction.
I think that the primary, and I'm not going to put it in terms of a percentage because you have different costs. So your CapEx costs are going to be the difference in cost between, say, a 32 port Ethernet switch, hardened Ethernet switch, and a 1x32 splitter. I don't sell Ethernet switches. I sell the splitters. I'm not advocating one way or the other here, but that would be in your CapEx right up front. The additional CapEx that you would face in an active is the cost to bring power to the cabinet and the monthly OpEx that you have to run that cabinet. So it can be as little as single-digit percentages depending on how broad your network is and what cost you're paying for your Ethernet switches, or it can be upwards of 20 to 25% more. I have yet to see an active network that costs less than a passive network. And in terms of the second part of your question, That's a great question. I can't tell you on the cost recovery models that are out there. I would actually recommend that you work with your engineers to come down and see if you can determine that. I believe that the ongoing OpEx of an active network is going to have you in a higher cost range. And it depends on the complexity of your network and what it takes to get to your fiber and your cabinets in order for service bases. I would think that they're probably pretty equal after deployment, with the exception of the ongoing OpEx that you have for replacement switches and power costs. Talked around it. I don't think I answered your question, but I did the best I could.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions? Somebody's holding a question up. I believe it was related to golf, so this is Scott. I'm unqualified to answer that.
4.
All right. Again, thank you, Matthew, for doing this for everybody. I appreciate it. You all can get in touch with him directly if you have questions that you didn't want to pose today or that come to you later. Our next webinar, 20-minute webinar, will be on October 1st, and it will be Consumers Energy, talking about the free energy assessments they will do for TAM members of your businesses. You can find all of the event information on our events page on our website. And Matthew, anything else before I let everybody go?
Again, I'll say thank you, and then Scott, I will send you a copy of the presentation in the next 5 minutes.
All right. Thank you, and thanks everybody for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.